Every so often, my husband, who is not a gynecologist, he's a software engineer, asks an astute question that other people are like, yeah, I want to know the answer to that too. So the other day I posted on my stories his question about what happens when you remove the fallopian tubes but you leave the ovaries behind. And while I thought it was kind of obvious, I realized from everyone's responses that this is worth doing a post on. Okay, so here are the fallopian tubes. They are the connection between the ovaries and the uterus. They are actually connected anatomically to the uterus, and they have these finger-like projections called fimbriae that kind of hover over each ovary. Now, there's a misconception that if you cut the tube here and remove it, you're basically leaving the ovary just kind of hanging out, and it's not attached to anything. The first question before I answer his question is, why would one take out their fallopian tubes and leave the ovaries behind? Well, there's actually lots of scenarios where that makes sense. If you are talking about someone who still ovulates and menstruates, they can still get pregnant even if their fallopian tubes are damaged, blocked, or need to be removed. Oftentimes we will recommend removal of both fallopian tubes if they're infected, inflamed because of endometriosis or prior pelvic infections. Additionally, we now know that there are many cases of high-grade ovarian cancer that actually originate from the cells at the end of the tube. So often we are removing both fallopian tubes as a form of cancer risk reduction. Now, one question he asked, which we hear all the time, is if you're taking out the fallopian tubes, why not just take out the ovaries? That's just another place where cancer can originate. And if you're taking out the tubes, it implies that you don't need your ovaries anymore, and that is not true. Even if you aren't interested in getting pregnant anymore, but if you're not really at that menopausal age in your late 40s or early 50s, you can benefit from all the hormones that your ovaries are producing. Your fallopian tubes are just like a conduit. They're not producing hormones, but your ovaries do. They make estrogen, which is important for your heart health, your bone health, and longevity. So it's important to not be hasty when it comes to removing the ovaries, and if you do remove the ovaries, to really look into hormone replacement therapy. Another reason to keep the ovaries is that you could still get pregnant. I have patients all the time who don't have fallopian tubes or they're damaged or blocked, and we do IVF where we do the retrieval through the vaginal wall, and the ovaries realistically actually sit down here. And just in case you're wondering or worried, is the ovary that's left behind just kind of floating in thin air and left to its own devices? It's not. It's actually held in place by many different ligaments that attach it to the pelvic sidewall. So even though it's not attached or in close relationship to the fallopian tube, because the fallopian tube is gone, it's still held in place by the broad ligament, the suspensory ligament of the ovary, and that's going to keep it in its place in the pelvis. It's important to note that despite these ligaments being in place, there's still a lot of mobility, and this is true even if your fallopian tubes still exist. Because of this, we always talk about avoiding the risk of something called ovarian torsion. So there's always some ability for the ovary to kind of move around, and if it's enlarged because of ovarian stimulation or because you have an ovarian cyst, that's just something to be mindful of. You don't want to do anything high impact that could twist it into a position it can't easily untwist from because of it being enlarged. So, these are just things that we should all know about our anatomy because we're walking around with our fallopian tubes and our ovaries, and the more you know. So thanks, Bobby, for the astute question. Keep them coming.